What happens when a mechanic with calloused hands and a woman born with a silver spoon find themselves stranded together during the worst storm of Timber Ridge's history? Rain lashing against windows, wind howling through ancient pines, their worlds collided as thunder cracked overhead. In the next few minutes, I'll show you how one roadside encounter between Jack and Grace sparked a chain reaction that breathed life back into a dying town. What unexpected twist in their chance meeting would forever alter Timber Ridge's future? Their story might change the way you see those small acts of kindness you perform every day. Sometimes the smallest gestures create the biggest ripples. Every subscriber means the world to me, and your support keeps these incredible stories coming. If you love heartwarming journeys and unexpected twists, hit that subscribe button and like the video. Also, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below and let's see how far this story has traveled. Jack's life is about to change forever. What if the person you least expect to change your life appears on the worst day imaginable? Jack Reyes wiped his calloused hands on a shop rag as thunder rolled across Timber Ridge. Rain lashed against the garage windows, and he grimaced at the stack of unpaid bills tucked beneath the counter. Another slow month meant tough decisions ahead. With the storm intensifying and no more appointments scheduled, Jack reluctantly flipped the open sign to closed 3 hours early. Every hour without customers cut into his already thin margins, but no one would bring their car in for service in weather like this. As he locked up and headed to his truck, lightning illuminated the darkened sky. The metallic tang of rain filled his nostrils while his weathered fingers gripped his keys tightly. Through the downpour he spotted a luxury sedan pulled over down the road, hazard lights pulsing weakly against the storm's fury. Jack hesitated, his breath fogging the truck window. Experience had taught him caution. The memory of a wealthy customer accusing him of overcharging still stung his pride. People with money often assumed the worst about small-town mechanics with grease under their fingernails. Despite everything, his conscience wouldn't allow him to abandon someone in this deluge. The rain soaked through his jacket in seconds as he approached the vehicle. Inside sat a woman staring at her phone, frustration evident in her expression. When he tapped on the window, she startled before lowering it slightly. "Car trouble?" Jack asked, rainwater dripping from his hair. "It just died," she replied, her cultured voice tinged with embarrassment. "I was driving and suddenly everything shut down." Jack nodded toward the hood. "Mind if I take a quick look? I own Reyes Auto down the road." The woman studied him, calculation clear in her eyes, the same wariness Jack recognized in himself when facing strangers. "I'm Grace," she said finally, popping the hood release. Jack worked methodically, quickly identifying the problem. Battery connections corroded and came loose. "I can jumpstart it, but you'll need a replacement soon." Grace watched from beneath an umbrella, the gulf between them evident in her designer clothes and his oil-stained jacket. "I can tow you to my garage," Jack offered gently. "No pressure." "You do that? In this weather?" Something in his manner seemed to surprise her. "That's the job," Jack replied simply. As he connected jumper cables, Grace's curiosity shifted from suspicious to genuine. When the engine roared to life, her smile transformed, creating an unexpected connection between them. "Thank you," she said. "Most people wouldn't have stopped. Follow me to the garage. The storm's getting worse." At the garage, Jack worked efficiently while Grace waited. She seemed uncomfortable when he refused payment for the simple jumpstart. "At least let me pay for the diagnostic," she insisted. "Neighbors help neighbors," Jack replied. "Even temporary ones." A curious expression crossed Grace's face as though deciphering a puzzle. The social distance between them momentarily shrank, replaced by mutual recognition, two people weary of prescribed roles. As Grace departed with her car running smoothly, sunlight broke through dark clouds. Neither could have predicted that this chance encounter would transform their lives and Timber Ridge itself. The sunlight that broke through the storm clouds that day would soon illuminate the shadows where Grace's secrets hid. When she returned to Timber Ridge days later, she arrived as someone new, someone without a famous last name or a trust fund. But how long can you hide who you really are when every polished word and refined gesture threatens to expose the truth? Grace parked her luxury sedan in front of a modest rental property on the edge of town. She'd deliberately chosen something unassuming, far from the sprawling estates she'd grown up in. As she carried her single suitcase inside, she rehearsed her cover story. A marketing consultant taking a break from city life, looking for small-town inspiration. She studied her reflection in the bathroom mirror that evening, removing her designer watch and replacing it with something unremarkable from the local store. Her fingers traced the faint tan line where her heirloom bracelet usually sat. Who am I without all this? She wondered. Her throat tightened as memories of stilted family dinners and conditional affection flooded back. Her hands, soft from a lifetime of privilege, would soon need to tell a different story. You can do this, she whispered. Just be yourself, minus the Pearson part. By shedding the trappings of her affluent background, Grace was attempting something profound, constructing an identity free from the constraints that had defined her entire life. She was running from the superficial connections and conditional relationships that had always accompanied her wealth. Her first week in town, Grace strategically planted roots without drawing attention. When asked about her past, she offered just enough to satisfy curiosity without inviting questions. Meanwhile, Jack noticed her around town. The woman from the storm appeared different now, dressed simply, her hair tied back casually. But something didn't align. Her posture remained impeccable. Her vocabulary occasionally revealed an education beyond what her story suggested. In the hardware store, Jack observed Grace confidently discussing paint finishes with the owner. At the diner, he watched her automatically reach for the wrong fork, then quickly correct herself, a tiny gesture betraying years of formal dining etiquette. These moments of incongruity heightened his curiosity about the enigmatic newcomer. Grace found liberation in Timber Ridge. Without the Pearson name, conversations became genuine rather than transactional. When she volunteered for the town's newsletter, she carefully disguised her marketing expertise, presenting ideas as suggestions rather than professional strategies. The psychological weight of her dual identity became most apparent during calls with her family. In her rental's small kitchen, Grace would transform back into Grace Pearson, fielding questions about when she would finish playing small-town tourist. I'm not playing at anything, Mother, she insisted. I'm finally figuring out who I am without all the accessories. Jack's curiosity finally prompted action when he spotted Grace examining a dent in her car bumper outside his garage. Need some help with that? He asked, noting how quickly she composed her expression. Just assessing the damage, she replied. Nothing urgent. You know, for someone who just moved to town, you seem to fit in pretty well here, Jack observed carefully. The comment hung between them, an innocent observation carrying the weight of unasked questions. As Grace fumbled for a response, fate offered an unexpected diversion. The boarded-up community center caught Jack's attention. The once vibrant building stood as a silent monument to everything Timber Ridge had gradually lost over the years. While most residents had resigned themselves to its deterioration, something stirred in both Jack and Grace. A shared recognition that perhaps this forgotten space held more possibility than anyone realized. They're selling it next month if nobody steps up, Jack said, his voice carrying a weight beyond the simple observation. Used to be the heart of town. Dances, town meetings, after-school programs. My dad talked about how it kept this place together. Grace studied the faded wooden structure, mentally calculating renovations it would require. What would it take to save it? More than this town's got left to give, Jack replied, but something in Grace's expression made him pause. Why? You're not seriously thinking. We could restore it, Grace said, the words tumbling out before she could filter them. Bring back what it represented. Jack's laugh carried no humor. You hardly know this town. And I'm... He trailed off, gesturing vaguely toward his garage. My father tried saving businesses around here. Nearly bankrupted us. Grace pulled out a small notebook. Just humor me for 5 minutes, she said, sketching potential partnerships and funding sources, framing her expertise as enthusiastic research rather than professional experience. Their working dynamic revealed complementary strengths. Grace navigated complex permitting processes with surprising skill, while Jack's local connections helped overcome skeptical town officials. When Grace arrived with organized renovation plans, Jack translated them into practical, budget-conscious solutions. Where Jack saw obstacles, Grace found creative workarounds, securing donated materials and organizing volunteer workdays. Where did you learn to negotiate like that? Jack asked after Grace convinced the town's electrician to donate services for prominently displayed sponsorship. I've had practice, she replied carefully. People respond when they feel invested in the outcome. The restoration became a healing process for Timber Ridge. Mrs. Jenkins, who'd attended her first dance there in 1962, shared stories while painting alongside teenagers. Mr. Harmon, the town's oldest resident, supervised youngsters installing light fixtures, recounting how the building had served as emergency shelter during the flood of '78. The hardware store offered discounted supplies. The diner provided lunch for volunteers. Jack and Grace worked side by side long after others had gone. Their conversations deepened, Grace sharing carefully edited stories while Jack revealed the weight of carrying his family's legacy in a declining town. One evening, as sunset bathed the space in golden light, Jack confessed, "I wanted to leave for years. Nothing felt worth staying for anymore." "And now?" Grace asked, setting down her paintbrush. "Now I'm starting to remember what my father saw in this place." His eyes held hers longer than necessary. Sometimes it takes someone seeing possibilities where you've only seen problems. The center's transformation progressed from structural repairs to design decisions incorporating the town's history. What began as a building project evolved into a collaborative model uniting diverse groups in Timber Ridge, strengthening social bonds throughout the community. On the evening before their soft opening, Grace received a text message that drained the color from her face. "Everything okay?" Jack asked. Grace nodded quickly. "Just a reminder about something I need to handle." She manufactured a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We should celebrate how far we've come." While they celebrated their accomplishment, neither could have predicted how quickly their fragile new connection would be tested. The community center's grand reopening had made headlines beyond their small town. Headlines that had finally reached the wealthy family Grace had never mentioned to anyone in Timber Ridge. The morning of the official ribbon-cutting ceremony arrived with perfect weather and excited chatter from townspeople gathering outside the freshly painted building. Grace stood near the podium, reviewing her notes when she spotted them, her parents walking purposefully across the town square, their designer attire marking them as outsiders. Grace Elizabeth Pearson, her mother's voice sliced through the crowd, silencing conversations mid-sentence. "So this is where you've been hiding." The name Pearson rippled through the gathering like a stone dropped in still water. Jack, adjusting the ceremonial ribbon, turned toward Grace, confusion etching across his features. "Mom. Dad." Grace managed, her carefully constructed world crumbling. "I wasn't expecting you." "Clearly," her father replied, surveying the surroundings with disdain. "When we saw your photo in that regional newspaper article, we thought there must be some mistake." Townspeople shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between Grace and her parents. "I don't understand," Jack approached, extending his hand. "I'm Jack Reyes." "Ah, the mechanic," Grace's mother smiled without warmth. "How industrious of you to help our daughter with her little project." "This center matters to everyone here," Grace said, finding her voice. Her father checked his watch. "Grace, we need to speak privately. Your mother's charity gala is next weekend and the board meeting." "I'm not coming back," Grace interrupted. "I've built something meaningful here." Her father's voice dropped to a controlled whisper that carried surprising distance. "This isn't real life, Grace. You're playing small-town savior until you get bored. We've indulged this identity crisis long enough." A collective intake of breath swept through the onlookers. Several people exchanged knowing glances, connecting invisible dots. Jack's expression shifted from confusion to betrayal as the truth crystallized. He backed away slightly. "You've been lying this entire time?" "Not lying," Grace pleaded. "I just didn't tell you everything." "Your family owns Pearson Industries," Jack said flatly, recognition dawning. "The same company that closed their manufacturing plant in the next county. 200 people lost their jobs." People began to whisper behind raised hands, faces hardening as they recognized the name. "That was a necessary business decision," her father interjected. "Markets change." "Grace," her mother cut in sharply, "enough of this charade. Your trust fund doesn't disappear because you're pretending to be common. You don't belong here." "That's where you're wrong," Grace responded, though her voice trembled. For the first time I do belong somewhere. Jack shook his head. Were any of our conversations real? Or was I just part of your identity crisis? Her father took her elbow. The car is waiting. I'm not going anywhere, Grace insisted, pulling away. But as she looked around at faces now clouded with doubt, the victory felt hollow. Jack wouldn't meet her eyes. Her deception had undermined everything they'd built together. The ceremonial scissors lay abandoned on the podium as Grace found herself caught between the world she'd fled and the life she'd carefully constructed. Both now seemed equally out of reach. The abandoned scissors became a symbol of what had broken between them, a truth exposed and a trust severed. In the days following the ceremonial disaster, Jack retreated into the familiar comfort of his work, burying himself in engine repairs that made sense in a way people no longer did. For years he'd protected himself from disappointment by expecting the worst, and now it felt like vindication. He'd let someone in, only to discover she wasn't who she claimed to be. The silence between them expanded as Jack examined every memory with Grace through the harsh lens of her revealed identity. When someone shows you who they are, you believe them, he told his Uncle Frank while working late. But what happens when everything they showed you is carefully constructed? The question plagued him each time he drove past the community center they'd rebuilt together. For Grace, each day in Timber Ridge became both a statement and a struggle. She'd chosen to stay despite her parents' ultimatums, renting a small apartment above the bookstore and declining their financial support. When she passed Jack on Main Street and he looked through her, the pain was physical, tangible. Letters explaining her reasons remained unsent, folded in her drawer like origami of unspoken truths. Beneath Jack's anger lay something more vulnerable, the fear that someone like Grace couldn't possibly choose someone like him unless it was temporary. The socioeconomic gulf between them seemed unbridgeable. Still, he found himself driving past her new apartment each night, wondering if she was already planning her departure. Meanwhile, Grace embedded herself in Timber Ridge. She took a job at the local coffee shop, working early mornings before handling freelance marketing projects. She volunteered at the senior center and joined town council meetings, using her expertise without flaunting it. Timber Ridge had become the only place where she felt authentic. Then came the cloudburst that revealed the community center's vulnerability, a significant roof leak threatening their restoration work. The emergency brought them face to face for the first time in weeks. "We need to move everything from the east wing," Jack said, his voice distant. The structural beams could be compromised. Working through the night, they fell into a rhythm that transcended their conflict. The scent of rain-soaked wood, the squeak of their shoes on wet floors, and the gentle brush of shoulders as they passed created a sensory cocoon around them. Their bodies remembered what their hearts were trying to forget. By dawn, as they salvaged children's artwork, the space between them had narrowed. "Why did you stay?" Jack finally asked, voice rough with exhaustion. "Your parents made it clear what it would cost you." "Because this is real," Grace said. "My life before was the performance, not this." Their conversation was interrupted by Sarah Jenkins, whose family's heating had been shut off despite the cold snap. Grace stepped forward like a lighthouse cutting through fog. "Let me make a call." Jack watched as Grace negotiated service restoration for the entire affected block, not as a Pearson heiress, but as a determined community advocate who wouldn't take no for an answer. "The technician will be there within the hour," she told Sarah. "This isn't charity. It's fixing something that shouldn't have happened." After Sarah left, Jack offered tentatively, "Coffee?" The thermos between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Grace's smile was cautious but real. "I'd like that." Their coffee moment at the community center marked a turning point, but neither Grace nor Jack realized what was coming next. That same evening, Grace's phone lit up with a message that would force her to make the most significant decision of her life. Her parents had issued an ultimatum that would reveal exactly what Timber Ridge truly meant to her. "Either you come home and resume your responsibilities, or consider yourself cut off," her father's message read. "No more allowance, no trust fund, no inheritance. Your choice, Grace." Grace confronted the true cost of independence. She stared at her phone for hours, her mind racing between security and authenticity. By morning, certainty replaced doubt. Without telling Jack or anyone else, she typed 2 words, "I understand." Grace's first weeks of financial independence were jarring. The coffee shop paycheck became her lifeline. She counted pennies at grocery stores and stretched meals for days. When her car needed repairs, she walked to work in the rain rather than deplete her dwindling savings. Beneath the struggle burned quiet pride. Each dollar represented something her family's fortune never could. A life built entirely on her own terms. Some mornings, exhausted from double shifts, she'd glimpse her reflection and recognize something new: resilience. Jack discovered Grace's situation gradually. Mrs. Henderson mentioned seeing Grace count exact change for day-old bread. Frank commented that Grace had asked about payment plans for a space heater. She turned down her family's fortune, Maggie finally revealed. They gave her an ultimatum: return to the city or lose everything. And she chose Timber Ridge. Jack sat stunned, coffee cooling between his hands. Her sacrifice forced him to confront his doubts. The woman he'd misjudged had surrendered financial security most would never abandon. Meanwhile, their relationship had sparked community transformation. The vacant storefront beside the community center now housed a bookshop. The old pharmacy had reopened. The farmers' market had doubled, drawing visitors from neighboring towns. One connection led to another, creating a web of renewed purpose throughout Timber Ridge. People who had lived as neighbors for decades without speaking now greeted each other by name. Jack found Grace closing the coffee shop, fatigue visible but determination unwavering. He asked her to drive with him to the exact spot where they'd first met, where her luxury car had broken down. "I've been thinking about connections," Jack said, turning toward her. "How one small moment can change everything." He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against hers. "You chose this town when no one would have blamed you for leaving. You chose a harder road when you had an easier one." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "This is the only place I've ever felt like myself. The money never made me happy, but this town, these people, you. This is where I found what matters." Jack smiled and reached into his pocket. "I'm not great with words, but I am good with symbols." He revealed a small handmade pendant fashioned from a copper battery terminal, polished to a warm glow on a delicate chain. A broken connection transformed into something enduring. "Sometimes what seems broken becomes something better," he said. "Will you build a life with me, Grace? Right here in Timber Ridge." What started with a simple decision to help a stranded motorist has evolved into something truly extraordinary for Timber Ridge. Jack and Grace's connection sparked a renaissance that transcends their individual lives. Their journey shows that removing society's labels creates space for authenticity to flourish. This transformation rippled outward, breathing life into forgotten spaces and reconnecting neighbors. Elderly Mrs. Wilson now hosts weekly gatherings, while the abandoned park bustles with community activities. The miracle was in that first moment of kindness, when Jack stopped in the pouring rain to help. The pendant Grace wore that day now symbolizes how profound changes often begin with the simplest human connections.